Welcome to Shadow Storyteller. If you love mysterious tales rooted in true events, do not forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment for more bedtime stories that linger long after the lights go out. On a frigid December morning in the year 1953, just before dawn painted the sky in bruised shades of violet and gray, a locomotive no one had seen in 30 years rolled silently into the station at Thurmond, West Virginia. It bore no conductor, no passengers, and no explanation, only rust, silence, and a single pocket watch ticking stubbornly in the engineer's cab, its hands frozen at exactly 3 minutes past 11. The train had vanished in the winter of 1923 during one of the worst blizzards the New River Gorge had ever known. It carried 47 souls, coal miners returning home for Christmas, a traveling bookseller from Cincinnati, a bridegroom heading to his wedding in Charleston, and an old woman named Eloan Voss, whose name appeared on no manifest, yet whose presence would echo through time like a whisper caught in the wind. Eloan was not a common name, not in those days, and certainly not in the hollers of Appalachia. She was tall, with silver-streaked hair braided tightly down her back, and eyes the color of river shale, gray, unreadable, ancient. She boarded the number 9 express at Hinton Station just after dusk, paid for her ticket in copper pennies, and carried a weathered satchel that smelled faintly of sage and damp earth. No one spoke to her. No one dared. The other passengers felt it too, the strange hush that fell over the car when she settled into seat number 23. Even the usual banter between miners dried up like creek beds in August. The storm struck without warning. Snow fell not in flakes but in thick, choking waves. Ice coated the rails like glass. The train slowed, then stopped, then vanished, swallowed whole by the white fury of the mountains. Search parties scoured the tracks for weeks. They found nothing. Not a coat, not a glove, not a single footprint leading away from the frozen rails. The railroad declared it lost. The families grieved. The town of Thurmond, already fading like old ink on a map, grew quieter still. And then, 30 winters later, it returned. On that December morning in 1953, young Jasper Pike, the stationmaster's grandson, was the first to see it. He had been fetching kindling from the woodshed when the low moan of steam pierced the stillness. He turned, heart slamming against his ribs, and saw the silhouette of an old Baldwin steam engine emerging from the mist, a ghost forged in iron and soot. It rolled to a halt with a sigh, as if weary from centuries of wandering. Jasper ran inside, shouting for his grandfather. When they returned, the train sat motionless, doors slightly ajar. Inside, the seats were empty, but perfectly preserved. A half-eaten apple rested on a tray. A newspaper lay open to the front page, dated December 22, 1923. And on the floor of the engineer's cab, wrapped in oilcloth, was the pocket watch, still ticking though its glass face was cracked and its chain blackened with age. But the most unsettling discovery was tucked beneath seat number 23. A child's woolen cap, hand-knitted in faded blue yarn, with a single dried sprig of mountain mint stitched into the seam. Locals whispered that Eloan Voss had been more than just a passenger. Some said she was a route worker from the Carolina backwoods, a keeper of old ways. Others claimed she had made a bargain with the mountains themselves, offering the train and its riders as a price for her own passage through time. Whatever the truth, the train never ran again. The railroad sealed the tracks. The engine was dismantled and buried deep in a storage yard outside Clifton Forge, Virginia, its parts numbered and locked away as if fearing it might wake. Yet on certain December nights, when the wind howls through the New River Gorge just right, travelers swear they hear the distant chuff of steam and the low whistle of a train that should not exist. And if you stand near the old Thurmond depot after midnight, you might catch the scent of sage and snow, and feel, just for a moment, the ghostly brush of a silver braid against your shoulder. No one knows where the train went during those 30 years. No one knows why it came back. But those who study the strange and unexplained say time is not a straight line in the Appalachians. It folds, it loops, it remembers, and sometimes it returns. 37 years after the train's impossible return, on a brittle January night in the year 1991, a freight inspector named Corwin Thale stumbled upon a rusted rail spike buried beneath overgrown brush near the abandoned Thurmond cutoff. It shouldn't have been there. The track had been torn up in the late 50s, carted off for scrap during the Great Consolidation of the Chesapeake and Ohio lines. Yet this spike was not only intact. It bore a series of faint, deliberate markings, carved with something sharper than weather or time. Corwin, a lean man with a hawk's gaze and a habit of pocketing odd relics, wiped the grime away with his sleeve. The symbols resembled script, but not English, not Cherokee either, though he'd worked alongside elders during track realignments near the reservation. They curved like river currents, spiraled like pine cones in autumn. And at the spike's tip, almost hidden beneath corrosion, was a tiny engraving, a train encircled by 3 interlocking moons. He reported it to his supervisor, who laughed it off as vandalism. But Corwin couldn't forget it. That night, he dreamt of steam curling through snow-laced pines, and a woman standing on the platform in a long indigo coat, her hands folded over a satchel that pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat wrapped in cloth. The next morning, Corwin drove to the public library in Beckley, requesting microfilm records from the 1920s. He found nothing about Eloan Voss, no passenger logs, no death notices, not even a census entry. But in a brittle issue of the Charleston Gazette dated January 3, 1924, buried beneath headlines about prohibition raids and coal strikes, was a short paragraph titled, "Engineer's Final Log." Last signal received from number 9 at milepost 78, 1923, December 22nd, at 22:57. Voice crackled, then clear. "We are not lost. We are waiting." Transmission ceased. No further contact. Corwin's hands trembled. He copied the passage onto a notepad, then drove back to Thurmond, parking his pickup on the gravel shoulder near the old depot's crumbling foundation. Snow had begun to fall, light, hesitant flakes that vanished before they touched the ground. He walked the path where the rails once ran, eyes scanning the earth. Near a bend where the new river carved a sharp curve through limestone, he saw it. A second spike, half buried, identical to the first. Then a third, 10 yards farther. They formed a line, precise as a compass bearing, pointing east toward a dense stand of hemlocks locals called Widow's Thicket. Against his better judgment, Corwin followed. The woods swallowed sound. Even his boots seemed muffled, as if the earth absorbed every footfall. At the thicket's heart, he found a stone cairn, small, human-made, crowned with a smooth river rock painted with the same 3-moon symbol. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskin just like the pocket watch decades prior, was a leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle but legible. The handwriting was elegant, slanted, unmistakably feminine. December 21st, 1923, it began. "They do not know I boarded tonight. The others, miners, lovers, dreamers, they believe this is an ordinary ride. But I feel the veil thinning. The blizzard is not weather. It is a doorway. And the train has been chosen." Corwin read on, breath fogging in the cold air. Eloan wrote of a pact made in the Smokies during the War of Rebellion, when her grandmother, a woman known only as Nita, had saved a dying rail worker by binding his spirit to the iron veins of the mountain. In return, the mountains demanded a reckoning every 100 years. One train, one crew, one moment suspended outside of time. Not destroyed, preserved. Held in the in-between, where sorrow and hope mingle like mist on the river. The number 9 is not lost. Eloan wrote. It is keeping watch. When the mountains grow heavy with forgetting, it returns to remind the living that some journeys do not end, they transform. At the journal's final page, a note in different ink, dated December 23, 1953. They found us. The boy with the wide eyes, he saw me through the window. I left the cap for him. Blue was my daughter's favorite color. She never made it past 5 winters. Perhaps, in this loop of time, she rides with us now. Corwin closed the journal. The snow had thickened. He looked up and froze. Through the trees, faint but unmistakable, came the long, low whistle of a steam locomotive. He ran. Branches whipped his face. His heart pounded like a signal drum. When he broke through the tree line, gasping, the depot stood empty. But the tracks, impossible, were there. Gleaming rails, freshly laid, steaming gently in the cold. And idling on them, smoke curling from its stack, was the number 9. The passenger door creaked open. Inside, warm light spilled onto the snow-dusted platform. Empty seats waited. Seat number 23 held a woolen blanket, neatly folded. Corwin did not step forward. He stood rooted, torn between instinct and awe. Then, from the engineer's cab, a voice, soft as falling ash, called his name. Not shouted, not demanded, just spoken. Corwin. He knew then that the train had not returned for curiosity or spectacle. It had come for him, like it had come for Jasper in 53, like it had come for Eloan in 23. Time in the gorge was not linear. It was a river that doubled back on itself, revealing old truths to those willing to listen. He took one step, then another. As his boot touched the stirrup, the journal in his coat pocket grew warm. The snow stopped falling. Somewhere deep in the mountains, a lone fiddle began to play, a tune both mournful and sweet, weaving through the trees like a promise kept across decades. The door closed behind him. The train pulled away without sound, without steam, gliding into the mist as if dissolving into memory itself. At dawn, Corwin's truck was found parked near the depot, engine cold, keys in the ignition. His thermos sat on the passenger seat, still half full of black coffee. His hat lay on the ground, covered in fresh snow. But Corwin Thale was never seen again. Years later, a hiker claimed to have spotted a man matching his description standing on a remote trestle near Sandstone Falls, staring east as if waiting for something only he could hear. Others swore they'd glimpsed the number 9 reflected in the river at twilight, its windows lit, its whistle silent, its passengers forever riding the loop between loss and longing. In Thurmond, the elders say the train appears only when the mountains ache for remembrance. When the world moves too fast, when grief is buried too deep, when someone's heart beats in rhythm with the old iron song. It does not steal. It invites. And those who board, they do not vanish. They become part of the story, part of the wind that howls through the gorge on winter nights, part of the silence between ticks of a frozen pocket watch, part of the blue wool cap left gently on a seat, waiting for the next soul who understands that some destinations are not places, but states of grace. To this day, if you walk the old railbed on the longest night of the year, and if your heart carries a sorrow you've never spoken aloud, you might feel the ground tremble, not from machinery, but from something older, something kind. And if you listen closely, beneath the whisper of pines and the rush of the new river, you'll hear it. The soft chuff of a steam engine, the creak of a door opening, and a woman's voice, clear as mountain spring. You've been expected. 23 years after Corwin Thale vanished, in the brittle hush of a March morning in the year 2014, a documentary filmmaker named Isolde Marlowe arrived in Thurmond with a worn map and a question that had haunted her since childhood. Her great-aunt, Maren Voss, a reclusive folklorist from Asheville, had left behind a single, cryptic note before her death in 1998. Find the train that carries time in its wheels. It knows our name. Isolde, skeptical but stubborn, had spent years chasing whispers of spectral rail lines across Appalachia. Most leads fizzled into campfire tales or hoaxes. But the number 9 was different. There were too many accounts too consistent in their strangeness. The pocket watch, the blue cap, the spike markings, the journal. And then there was the name Voss. Not common, not random. At the Thurmond Heritage Center, a repurposed depot-turned-museum, Isolde met Emmett Clay, the 82-year-old former brakeman who'd worked the C&O line in the 60s. His hands were gnarled like old roots, but his eyes were sharp as flint. When she mentioned Eloan Voss, he fell silent for a long moment, then shuffled to a locked drawer beneath the ticket counter. He handed her a small tin box. Inside lay a single dried sprig of mountain mint, brittle but fragrant, and a photograph faded to sepia. It showed a young woman in a long coat standing beside the number 9, her face turned slightly away, but unmistakably Eloan. On the back, in faint pencil, December 22nd. She said the train would return when the river sings backward. Isolde frowned. The river never sings backward. Emmett chuckled, a dry sound like stones tumbling. Not literally, girl. But once every generation, the new river floods so high and quiet during a full moon that the current stills, and for just a few hours, the surface reflects the sky like glass. Locals call it the mirror tide. Last one was in 1991. The night Corwin disappeared. Isolde's pulse quickened. The next mirror tide, according to hydrological almanacs, was due in 3 nights. She spent the days interviewing townsfolk, recording their stories. A retired schoolteacher recalled her grandmother claiming to have seen the train glide through snow without tracks. A fisherman swore he'd heard a fiddle playing from empty boxcars near Hawk's Nest in the 80s. And old Lila Creech, who ran the general store, pressed a small iron charm into Isolde's palm, 3 interlocking moons cast in railroad slag. For protection, she murmured, and recognition. On the night of the mirror tide, Isolde stood on the riverbank just below the old depot, camera rolling, breath clouding in the cold. The moon hung full and silver over the gorge. The water, usually restless, lay perfectly still, so calm it mirrored the stars with eerie precision. Then, at precisely 11 minutes past 3, echoing the pocket watch's frozen time, the surface rippled. Not from wind. From beneath. A low rumble vibrated through the earth, growing into the familiar chuff of steam. From the mist rising off the river, the number 9 emerged, not on rails, but gliding silently over the water's surface, its wheels turning without sound, its headlamp casting a golden glow across the mirrored expanse. Isolde's hands shook, but she kept filming. The train slowed as it neared the bank. The door to passenger car B opened. Inside, Corwin Thale stood in the aisle, unchanged from his 1991 photo. Same flannel shirt, same worn boots, same quiet sorrow in his eyes. Beside him sat a young girl in a blue dress, no older than 6, her hair braided with sprigs of mint. And in seat 23, Eloan Voss looked up. She did not smile. She did not beckon. She simply held out a hand, palm up, as if offering a choice, not a command. Isolde's gray-tance words echoed, "It knows our name." She stepped forward, not onto the train, but to the very edge of the bank. "Why me?" she called, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Eloan's reply carried across the water like a sigh. "Because you believe in stories that ache. Because your blood remembers what your mind forgot. And because the loop is not complete." "The loop?" "The train carries those who carry weight," Eloan said. "Grief, regret, unfinished love. But it also carries truth. And truth must be witnessed." She gestured to the girl. This is Leora. She fell into the old well near Hinton in 1920. The townsfolk said she drowned, but the mountain took her instead, gave her to us. She's been waiting for someone to tell her story without fear. Isolde lowered her camera. You want me to film it? No, Eloan said gently. You are to live it. For a while. And then, without further warning, the train exhaled a plume of steam that enveloped Isolde completely. She felt no cold, no fear, only a warmth like sunlight through old glass, and the sensation of time folding around her like a blanket. When the mist cleared, she was no longer on the bank. She stood inside the car, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The seats were warm. The air smelled of pine, coal smoke, and something sweet, like memory given form. Corwin nodded at her, as if he'd expected her all along. The girl, Leora, held out a small book bound in birch bark. Inside were sketches of the gorge, the depot, the faces of passengers long gone, but also dates that hadn't happened yet. 2025, 2041, and one entry in Eloan's hand. When the last keeper forgets the song, the train will stop forever. Isolde looked up. Am I the keeper now? Eloan placed a hand on her shoulder. Her touch was cool but not cold. You are the witness, the storyteller, the one who will carry this truth back, not to prove it, but to keep the wonder alive. Because wonder is the only thing that keeps the veil thin enough for kindness to cross. For 3 days, or what felt like 3 days, Isolde rode the loop. The train passed through blizzards that melted before they touched the windows, through tunnels where stars bloomed on the walls, through stations that no longer existed but flickered into being just long enough for a ghostly conductor to call the name of a lost town. She spoke with miners who missed their children, with brides who never reached their grooms, with soldiers who never saw the war end. Their stories were not tragic. They were tender, preserved. On the 4th morning, or perhaps the same morning, stretched thin, Isolde stood again at the riverbank. The train idled just offshore, its whistle silent. Eloan leaned from the window. When you return, tell them we are not gone. Tell them we are waiting, not in fear, but in peace. And tell them that blue was always the color of hope. Then the train turned not on tracks, but on the current of the river itself, dissolving into mist until only the faint scent of sage remained. Isolde walked back to town as dawn broke. Her camera was empty, no footage, no audio. But in her coat pocket, she found the birch bark book, now filled with new pages in her own handwriting, detailing everything she'd seen. She published nothing. Not then. Instead, she began recording oral histories, quietly, carefully, preserving the voices of those who remembered the in-between places. She taught workshops on Appalachian folklore. She left mint sprigs on old rail spikes. And every December 22nd, she returned to Thurmond, stood on the bank, and whispered a single sentence into the wind. We remember. And sometimes, just sometimes, the river answered with a distant chuff of steam, soft as a lullaby, steady as a heartbeat. Because the train was never about vanishing. It was about belonging, not to the past, not to the future, but to the sacred, shimmering thread that connects all who carry love, loss, and the courage to listen when the mountains whisper. And so, the number 9 rolls on, through snow, through time, through the quiet spaces between breaths, carrying its passengers not to an end, but to a forever that feels, impossibly, like home. 11 years later, in the damp chill of an October evening in the year 2025, a young archivist named Kaylin Rourke arrived at the Thurmond Heritage Center with a water-stained envelope addressed in handwriting he hadn't seen since childhood. It bore no postmark, no stamp, only his name, written in looping script beneath a faded emblem of 3 interlocking moons. Inside was a single key, cold to the touch, and a note. The depot basement holds what the river remembers. Come before the last leaf falls. Kalen had grown up in Lewisburg, raised by a grandmother who told stories of trains that rode on mist and women who spoke to mountains. He dismissed them as folklore, until the day he found Isolde Marlowe's birchbark journal tucked inside a donated box of railroad ledgers at the State Archive. Its pages were filled with names, dates, and sketches that matched no known records, yet felt eerily familiar, as if his own hands had drawn them in a dream. Now, standing before the old depot's rusted basement door, a door he'd been told was sealed since the 1970s, he turned the key. It clicked with unnatural smoothness, as though oiled just moments before. The hinges groaned, but not from disuse. From recognition. The air below was dry, surprisingly warm, and carried the faint scent of coal smoke and dried mint. A single bare bulb flickered to life as he descended the stairs, though the switch at the top was long dead. At the bottom, resting on a wooden crate marked CNO scrap, "Do not remove," was a brass signal lantern, its glass panes etched with the same river current script he'd seen in Isolde's journal. When he lifted it, the flame inside flared, not with kerosene, but with a soft blue light that cast no shadows. Behind the crate, the wall was not stone, as he'd expected, but a series of railroad ties stacked vertically, each one inscribed with a name and date. Corwin Thale, Deloan Voss, Leora Hinton, Jasper Pike. Dozens more, some from the 1920s, others from the 1950s, even one from 2009. All passengers, all keepers, all part of the loop. At the very center, one tie remained blank, except for a shallow groove shaped like a train. Kalen's breath caught. He reached into his coat and withdrew the birchbark journal. As he did, the lantern's flame pulsed. The blank tie began to warm. Tiny lines of light traced across its surface, forming letters not carved by hand, but grown, like roots writing in wood. Kalen Rourke, it read. Born under a waning moon, raised on silence, chosen for your listening heart. He hadn't spoken his name aloud since arriving. From the shadows at the far end of the basement, a soft voice emerged. Isolde's, though she'd vanished from public life in 2018, leaving only a final note. The story needs new hands. She stepped into the lantern's glow, older now, her hair silver, her eyes still sharp with quiet fire. You weren't meant to find the journal, she said. It was meant to find you. Blood calls to blood, even when the line is thin. Kalen stared. My grandmother, she never mentioned a sister. She wasn't her sister, Isolde replied gently. She was her echo. Your grandmother was Leora's great-niece, descended from a cousin who took in the child everyone believed drowned. The mountain gave her back, but only to those who'd carry the truth. She gestured to the lantern. This is the beacon of the loop. It doesn't light the way forward, it lights the way back. To the moment the train needs to be seen again. Why now? Because the world is forgetting, Isolde said. Not just this story, but the kind of wonder that keeps doors open between worlds. People no longer look up. They don't listen to rivers. They don't believe that grief can be a vessel for grace. She handed him a small cloth bundle. Inside were 3 items. The pocket watch from 1953, its hands now moving steadily, the blue woolen cap, still soft after a century, and a single rail spike, freshly etched with his name. The train will come on All Hallows Eve, she said. Not to take you, but to show you. There's a child in Beckley who hasn't spoken since her brother vanished in the river last spring. She draws trains every night. Always the same one. Always with a woman in an indigo coat watching from the window. Kalen understood. He was not being summoned as a passenger. He was being prepared as a bridge. Over the next 2 nights, he stayed in the basement, studying the ties, tracing the names, learning the rhythm of the loop. The lantern never dimmed. The air never stilled. And on the evening of October 31st, as fog rolled in from the New River, he walked to the overgrown rail wearing the blue cap and carrying the lantern high. At exactly 11 minutes past 3, the ground trembled. The number 9 emerged from the mist, not on tracks, not on water, but suspended in the space between, its windows glowing like embers. The door opened. Eloan stood there, unchanged, her eyes holding centuries of quiet vigil. Behind her, Corwin nodded. Lyra smiled. And in the far seat, a boy no older than 10 sat with his hands folded, wearing a soaked flannel shirt and a look of peaceful confusion. Eli Mercer, missing since April, presumed drowned. Eloan extended her hand, not to Kaelin, but toward the town. "Bring her," she said. "The girl who draws the train. She is not broken. She is tuned." Kaelin didn't hesitate. He drove through the night to Beckley, arriving at the Mercer home just before dawn. He didn't knock. He simply stood on the porch, lantern in hand, and held up the blue cap. Upstairs, a window opened. A small face peered out, pale, wide-eyed, silent. The girl, Marin, stared at the lantern's blue flame. Then, without a word, she disappeared from the window. Minutes later, she stood barefoot on the porch in her nightgown, clutching a notebook filled with train sketches. She took Kaelin's hand. They returned to Thurmond as the moon faded. The train waited. Marin didn't speak as she climbed aboard. But when she saw Eli, her brother, she ran to him, tears streaming down her face. They embraced as if no time had passed, because in the loop, none had. Eloan turned to Kaelin. "You may come aboard for one turn," she said, "but your place is not here. Your place is out there, keeping the story alive so others may find their way when they're lost." He stepped inside just long enough to feel the warmth, to hear the soft hum of the wheels singing against unseen rails, to smell the pine and mint and hearth smoke that clung to the car like a blessing. Then he stepped back. The door closed. The train lifted into the mist, dissolving like breath on glass. Marin returned home that morning, still silent, but no longer haunted. She began speaking again within a week. Her first words, "The train is kind." Kaelin stayed in Thurmond. He reopened the Heritage Center, not as a museum of the past, but as a sanctuary for stories that live between worlds. He installed the lantern in the front window, where it glows every night, blue and steady. Visitors say it pulses faintly when someone speaks a true thing aloud within its light. And on All Hallows' Eve, when the fog curls low over the river and the last leaf trembles on the sycamore by the depot, you might see 2 figures standing on the old rail, a young man in a blue cap and a little girl with a notebook, waiting not with fear, but with quiet readiness. For the train does not haunt. It heals. It does not steal time. Returns it, gently, to those who've lost their way. And as long as there are those willing to remember, to listen, to believe that sorrow can be a doorway and not just a weight, the number 9 will keep rolling. Through blizzards, through silence, through the loving, stubborn heart of Appalachia. Not lost, never lost, just waiting to be seen. 6 years after Kaelin Rourke became the keeper of the Thurmond Lantern, in the late hush of a September dusk in the year 2031, a letter arrived, not by post, but tucked beneath the lantern's base one morning, wrapped in birch bark and tied with twine dyed the deep blue of midnight. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the script flowed with the same river current grace that marked the rail ties and Eloan's journal. It read simply, "The loop widens. Come to the well at Hinton before the equinox moon." Kaelin knew the well. Not from maps, but from whispers. The old hollow well, just beyond the crumbling remains of the Hinton spur line. A place children avoided, adults denied, and folklore claimed had swallowed 3 children in the winter of 1921. One of them had been Leora. Now, with Marin Mercer grown and studying anthropology at Appalachian State, with a soul long gone, her final journal entry dated, "The day the lantern glowed gold," Kalen felt the weight of succession pressing upon him. He was no longer the young archivist chasing echoes. He was the echo now. And echoes, he'd learned, must be tended. He drove to Hinton at dawn. The well stood in a hollow cloaked in sugar maples, their leaves just beginning to blush crimson. Iron bars sealed its mouth, rusted shut decades ago. But the twine from the letter was wrapped around the lock. Fresh, supple, impossibly new. As Kalen knelt, the earth beneath his boots trembled, not violently, but like a breath held and released. The lock clicked open on its own. He lifted the bars carefully and peered inside. Darkness. Then, far below, a soft blue pulse, the same hue as the lantern's flame. From the depths came a voice, not aged, not young, but layered like stone over time. Kalen. It was Eloan. He didn't question how. Time in the gorge had never obeyed clocks. "I'm here," he said. "Lower the lantern," she instructed. Not to light the dark, but to call the memory. He did. The moment the blue flame passed the well's rim, the air shifted. Mist coiled upward, not cold, but warm, carrying the scent of wet earth and mint. The ground softened beneath him, and he sank, not falling, but descending, as if the earth itself cradled him down into a chamber lined with smooth river stone. At its center stood Eloan, unchanged, her indigo coat trailing over moss-covered rails that vanished into the walls. Beside her stood not just Corwin and Leora, but others Kalen had only read about. The bookseller from Cincinnati, the bridegroom from Charleston, the 47 souls of the original journey, all present, all calm, all watching him with eyes that held no hunger, only hope. "The loop is not shrinking," Eloan said. "It is branching. The world outside grows louder, yes, but deeper within, more souls are seeking silence. More are listening." She gestured to a new rail tie leaning against the wall. It bore not one name, but two, Marin Mercer and Eli Mercer. "Marin has been dreaming of a train that runs through cities now," Eloan continued. "Not just hollows and rivers. She saw it last week in Charlotte, gleaming beneath a thunderstorm, stopping for just one moment outside a hospital where a mother wept for her stillborn child. The mother felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned, no one was there, only the scent of mint and a blue thread caught in her coat. Kalen understood. The loop was evolving. It was no longer bound to the new river gorge. It was answering sorrow wherever it bloomed, urban alleys, suburban bedrooms, highway rest stops in the dead of night. "But I can't be everywhere," he said. "You don't have to be," Eloan replied. "The lantern chooses its next bearer when the time is right. Not by blood, not by lineage, by listening." She handed him a small leather pouch. Inside were two things: a single dried mint leaf, impossibly whole, and a sliver of polished iron shaped like a train wheel. "Give these to the one who hears the whistle in a silent room, the one who feels the rails hum beneath concrete. They will know what to do." Before he could ask more, the chamber began to brighten. The stone walls softened into mist. Eloan's form grew translucent, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "Tell them we are not ghosts. We are guardians. And the train is still running." Kalen awoke on the surface, the lantern in his lap, the pouch in his hand, dawn painting the maples gold. The well was sealed again, the bars rusted shut as if untouched for a century. But in his pocket, the iron sliver was warm. Back in Thurmond, he didn't wait. He contacted Marin. She arrived 2 days later, her eyes wide not with fear, but recognition. "You felt it too," he said. She nodded. "Last Tuesday, I was in the library, and I heard a train whistle, clear as day, though the nearest track is 50 miles away. And then I smelled mint. He gave her the pouch. The moment her fingers closed around the iron sliver, the lantern on the windowsill flared blue, then shifted, just for a heartbeat, to gold. That night, they stood together on the rail. No mist, no train, but the ground hummed faintly, like a string plucked deep underground. "The loop isn't ending," Marin whispered. "It's growing roots." And she was right. Over the next year, reports trickled in, not as urban legends, but as quiet confessions shared in therapy offices, support groups, late-night radio calls. A nurse in Pittsburgh swore a steam whistle calmed a dying patient's final breath. A teenager in Nashville left a blue ribbon on an abandoned rail spur after dreaming of a woman who gave her back her voice. In Detroit, a mural appeared overnight on a viaduct wall. A train gliding through stars, passengers waving from open doors, a single mint sprig painted beneath the engine. No one claimed it. No one could explain how the paint resisted rain and graffiti. Kalin and Marin documented it all, not to prove, but to preserve. They turned the Heritage Center into a living archive, where visitors could leave notes, drawings, or small tokens if they'd felt the presence of the train. The collection grew. A child's shoe, a wedding ring, a ticket stub dated December 22nd, a harmonica that played only one note, the same low tone as the number 9's whistle. Then, on the autumn equinox of 2035, the lantern dimmed. Not suddenly, not tragically. It simply grew softer, its blue flame cooling to a gentle ember. Kalin knew what it meant. His time as keeper was ending. That evening, he walked Marin to the riverbank. The water was still. The moon hung low. "The train will come for you soon," he said. She didn't flinch. "I know. Will you stay? Or ride?" She looked out over the mirrored water. "I think I'm meant to do both." At midnight, the mist rose. The number 9 emerged, not gliding, but anchored, waiting. Eloan stood in the doorway, her hand outstretched, not to Marin, but to the lantern Kalin carried. He gave it to her. She placed it in the engineer's cab, where it fused with the steam gauge, its light now part of the train itself. Marin stepped aboard, but only halfway. One foot on the train, one on the earth. "I'll ride the loop," she said, "but I'll return. Every season. To gather the stories. To light the way for others." Eloan smiled, the first true smile Kalin had ever seen on her face. "Then the loop is whole." The train pulled away, slower this time, its whistle sounding not once, but 3 times, like a promise kept, a door held open, a breath shared. Kalin never saw it again. But he didn't need to. Because now, in towns across America, in alleyways, on lonely highways, in hospital gardens and city parks, people leave small offerings on rusted rails or storm drains. A sprig of mint, a blue thread, a whispered name. And on certain nights, if you stand very still and listen past the noise of the world, you might hear it. The soft chuff of a steam engine. Not lost, not legend, but alive. Running on the rails of remembrance. Carrying the quiet truth that no one is ever truly gone, as long as someone is willing to remember them with kindness. In the spring of 2042, 7 years after Marin Mercer began her seasonal rides on the number 9, a peculiar pattern emerged, not in newspapers or police reports, but in the quiet corners of the internet, in community bulletin boards, and in the margins of municipal maintenance logs. Across the eastern United States, from the hills of Maine to the bayous of Louisiana, rusted railroad spikes were turning up in places where no tracks had existed for over a century. Each spike bore the same delicate etching, 3 interlocking moons, and beneath them, a single word in flowing script: listen. The phenomenon went unnoticed by most. But to those who knew the signs, the descendants of miners, the keepers of root work, the archivists of forgotten grief. The message was clear. The loop was no longer just responding. It was inviting, and it had chosen a new messenger. Her name was Tamsin Vale, a 17-year-old climate researcher interning with the National Park Service in Harper's Ferry. She wasn't from Appalachia. She wasn't even from the South. She'd grown up in Portland, Oregon, raised by two scientists who dismissed folklore as cognitive noise. Yet from the age of 9, Tamsin had woken every December 22nd at exactly 3:11 a.m., drenched in sweat, heart racing, with a vivid memory of standing on a train platform in snow so deep it swallowed sound. She'd never told anyone. Not until the day she found a spike embedded in the roots of a fallen sycamore along the C&O Canal towpath, its surface gleaming as if freshly forged, its etching damp with dew despite the dry heat of late May. When she touched it, the world stilled. Birdsong faded. The river hushed. And from somewhere deep beneath the earth came the low, resonant chuff of a steam engine, steady, patient, ancient. That night, she dreamt not of snow, but of water, clear, still water reflecting a train suspended midair, its wheels turning without motion, its windows filled with faces watching her with quiet expectation. Among them was Marin, older now, her hair streaked with silver, holding out a birch bark notebook identical to the one Kaylin had once carried. Tamsin woke with her fingers curled around something that hadn't been there when she fell asleep. A single dried mint leaf, cool and pliant, resting on her pillow. She reached out to Kaylin Rourke. He lived now in a small cabin on the edge of the New River Gorge, tending a garden of heirloom herbs and writing letters to strangers who'd left notes at the Heritage Center. When Tamsin arrived, breathless and trembling, he didn't ask for proof. He simply poured her tea, handed her a sprig of fresh mint from his windowsill, and said, "The train doesn't choose the loudest hearts. It chooses the ones that listen in silence." Over the next week, he taught her the language of the loop, the way the lantern's flame flickered faster when a new soul was near its breaking point, how the rail ties in the basement hummed when the train was preparing to branch into a new region, why the color blue wasn't just a shade, but a frequency of compassion. "The number 9 isn't bound by geography anymore," Kaylin explained, tracing the 3-moon symbol in the dust on his table. "It moves through emotional landscapes now. A mother's grief in Chicago. A veteran's loneliness in Albuquerque. A child's fear in Miami after a storm. The train appears where sorrow has been buried too deep to speak." Tamsin understood. She'd spent her life measuring carbon levels and glacier melt, but she'd always felt the deeper currents, the unspoken pain in her mother's voice after her brother's overdose, the quiet despair in her father's eyes when he thought no one was looking. Science could map the surface of the world, but it couldn't heal its hidden fractures. The train could. On the night of the summer solstice, Kaylin took her to the old railed. The air was thick with fireflies. The river sang softly below. "You'll know when it's time," he said. "Not by sight, by stillness." And then it came. Not with mist or fanfare, but with a sudden absence of sound. The crickets, the wind, even Tamsin's own breath, all hushed as if the world were holding its breath for her. The number 9 stood on the tracks, solid and real, its brass fittings gleaming under the full moon. The door opened. Marin stepped out, not as a ghost, but as a woman who'd stepped between worlds and returned whole. "You've been hearing it for years," Marin said, her voice warm as embers. "Now it's time to answer." Tamsin didn't hesitate. She climbed aboard. Inside, the car was not frozen in the past, but alive with the present. Digital tablets rested on some tray tables, displaying weather maps and satellite images. A solar charger hummed softly near the window. Yet the scent remained the same: pine, mint, coal smoke, and something deeper, the quiet hum of collective remembrance. Eloan sat in seat 23, her eyes brighter than Tamsin remembered from her dreams. You measure the world's wounds, she said. Now learn to heal them. For 3 days, or what felt like 3 days, Tamsin rode the expanded loop. The train passed through wildfire smoke in California, where it hovered near a burned-out neighborhood while a woman sobbed over the ashes of her childhood home. It stopped outside a shelter in St. Louis, where a teenage boy clutched a backpack and stared at the sky, and felt, for the first time in years, the gentle brush of a hand on his shoulder. In each place, the train left no trace, except for those who were ready to receive it. On her return, Tamsin stood once more on the Thurmond bank, the first light of dawn painting the gorge in rose and gold. Marin handed her 2 things, the iron sliver shaped like a wheel, now warm with use, and a new lantern, smaller, lighter, its glass panes etched not with script, but with constellations. This one runs on starlight and silence, Marin said. Use it wisely. Tamsin didn't replace Kalen. She extended him. While he tended the roots in Appalachia, she carried the branches outward, speaking at universities not just about climate data, but about emotional ecology. She taught that grief, like carbon, must be cycled, not buried. That stories, like rivers, must be allowed to flow. And every December 22nd, at exactly 3:11 a.m., she lit the lantern and stood beneath the open sky, whispering the names of those she'd met on the loop, names the world had forgotten, but the train remembered. In 2048, during a record-breaking heat wave that left half the country without power, reports surfaced of a steam train appearing at the edge of blackout zones, its whistle carrying through the dark, its light cutting through smoke and despair. People said it brought no water, no food, but a sense of calm so profound that riots ceased, neighbors shared generators, and strangers held each other as the temperature climbed. No footage survived. No official record was made. But in basements, in community centers, in the back pockets of work shirts, blue threads began to appear, left anonymously, carried like talismans. The legend of the number 9 was no longer a ghost story. It was a practice, a quiet rebellion against indifference, a reminder that even in an age of algorithms and satellites, the oldest magic remains: to witness, to remember, to offer kindness without proof. And somewhere, in the folded spaces between seconds, the train rolls on, its wheels turning not on iron, but on the unbroken thread of human care. Not lost, not myth, but moving, always moving, carrying the light, carrying the names, carrying the hope that one day everyone will learn to listen, not just with their ears, but with their bones. But the loop has a price. No one speaks of it, not Kaylin, not Marin, not even Eloan in her quietest whispers. They show only the warmth, the healing, the gentle return of lost voices. They do not say what happens when the loop frays. In the winter of 2051, Tamsin Vale stopped returning on the solstice. The lantern remained lit, yes, but its flame burned black at the core, flickering with a cold that made frost bloom on glass untouched by wind. The mint in Kaylin's garden withered overnight, roots turning to ash in the soil. And in cities across the country, people began reporting not comfort, but presence, a figure in an indigo coat standing at the foot of their bed, watching. Not speaking, not moving, just waiting. Then came the dreams, not of snow or trains, but of endless corridors inside the number 9, cars stretching into darkness, doors opening onto rooms filled with faces pressed against the glass, mouths open in silent screams. Passengers who never got off. Passengers who couldn't. Marin was the first to vanish completely. Her last journal entry, scrawled in shaky hand, read, "It doesn't bring them back. It keeps them. And it's hungry for more." Kaylin searched the basement ties. New names had appeared, not carved, but burned into the wood, the letters still smoldering when he touched them. Among them, Tamsin Vale. And beneath it, in fresh, wet script that smelled of river mud, asterisk, you listened. Now you stay. The final warning came on December 22nd, 2051. At exactly 3:11 a.m., every clock in Thurman stopped. The river froze solid in seconds, ice climbing the banks like grasping fingers. And from the gorge, not the gentle chuff of steam, but a long, shrieking whistle tore through the night. A sound not made of metal, but of voices fused together in agony. The number 9 didn't glide in. It lurched from the mist, its paint peeling to reveal rust that pulsed like raw flesh. Its windows were no longer lit, they were watching. Dozens of eyes blinked in the dark behind the glass. The door slammed open on its own, revealing not a Lowen, but a figure stitched together from overcoats and shadow, its face shifting between every passenger it had ever taken and never released. It didn't invite. It reached. Kalen stood his ground, lantern raised, but the flames snuffed out the moment the thing stepped onto the platform. Its hand, long-fingered and cold as grave soil, closed around his wrist. Not to pull him in. To claim him. The last thing he saw before the train swallowed him whole was the birch bark journal lying in the snow, its pages flipping wildly on their own, filling with new names, not of the lost, but of the next. And among them, freshly written in ink that dripped like blood. Asterisk. Now, the train no longer waits for the grieving. It hunts them. It appears not in moments of quiet sorrow, but in the split second before a car crash, in the gasp before a heart gives out, in the dark breath between life and death, offering not peace, but perpetuity. Ride forever, it whispers. Never be forgotten. But those who board no longer wave from the windows. They press their palms against the glass, eyes wide with the terrible truth. The number 9 doesn't carry souls between worlds. It feeds on the space between. And the loop was never a circle. It was a trap. One that's still running. One that's still hungry. And if you've ever heard a train whistle on a windless night, it's already too late.